All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are going deep into the world where psychology and the occult meet.
Ooh, sounds spooky.
It is fascinating stuff.
That's good.
We're diving into the work of Carl Jung, specifically his ideas about the occult.
Yeah.
You guys sent in some really interesting excerpts from his book, Psychology and the Occult, so we'll be pulling from that.
Yeah, Jung was really ahead of his time when it came to exploring those mysterious experiences most scientists kind of avoided.
Right. It's like he wasn't afraid to go there. But just to be clear, we're not here to debate whether ghosts are real or not, or any of that stuff.
Definitely not.
Instead, we're using Jung's ideas to understand how our minds work, especially all that unconscious stuff, those hidden depths,
Yeah.
and why we are so drawn to these mysterious experiences.
And one thing that makes Jung so interesting is that he didn't approach these topics like, say, a paranormal investigator or anything like that.
Right.
He looked at them from the perspective of a scientist of the mind. You know what I mean? What fascinated him was something he called the phenomenology of the psyche.
Okay, so I'm guessing that means he was more interested in what happens inside our heads when we experience things like visions or premonitions than trying to prove if those things are actually real.
You got it. For Jung, the real question wasn't whether ghosts exist, but why people believe in them. Why is the human mind so drawn to those beliefs?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's like he was less interested in debunking the supernatural and more interested in understanding why it's such a big part of human experience across cultures and throughout history.
Exactly. And to get to the bottom of that, he dug deep into the unconscious mind, all that stuff that's going on beneath the surface.
Right. But before we go there, let's talk about one of Jung's most famous case studies.
Oh, yeah. Good idea. It's a good example of his approach.
It's the one about a young woman he called SW, and it is a wild one. It involved trances, visions, and even what seemed like channeling different personalities, which is...
Yeah, she claimed to channel her deceased grandfather.
Right.
And then this other really intriguing character named Ulrich von Gerbenstein.
Oh, yeah. And didn't Ulrich speak with this thick North German accent, even though SW had never really been exposed to that dialect? It's like something straight out of a Gothic novel.
It is. And that's just one little detail. The really fascinating part is that these personalities weren't totally random. They actually mirrored different aspects of SW's own life, her upbringing, even like her hidden desires. It's almost as if her subconscious mind was putting on this elaborate play, using these characters to work through her inner conflicts.
So it's not just some spooky story of possession or channeling. We can look at it as a way of understanding how the unconscious can create these really complex and compelling narratives.
Yes,
Thanks.
exactly. And that brings us to a really important takeaway from this case. It shows how the unconscious can be so powerful that it can even lead to self-deception.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying she was faking it?
Not necessarily. It's more nuanced than that. Jung observed that SW was highly suggestible. He even noted that even the lightest touch in certain areas would trigger these really elaborate hallucinatory scenes for her.
So are you saying that maybe she wasn't consciously deceiving others, but her unconscious was so active that it was kind of deceiving her?
That's a great way to put it. And that raises a really crucial question. How do we tell what's real from what's a product of our own minds, especially when the unconscious can be so creative?
That's a question that comes up again and again in this field, and it leads us right into one of Jung's most influential ideas, his concept of the unconscious.
Oh, absolutely. For Jung, the unconscious wasn't just some dark place where we bury our repressed memories and desires.
Right.
It was a dynamic force, a wellspring of creativity, intuition, and even spiritual experience.
And he didn't just stop at the personal unconscious.
No way.
Yeah.
He went even deeper. He came up with this idea of the collective unconscious, which he said we all share as human beings.
Okay, I think we need to unpack this collective unconscious idea a bit.
Mm.
Because if the personal unconscious is like our unique fingerprint, what would you say the collective unconscious is like?
Let me see. Think of it as the basic blueprint of the human psyche, like the foundation.
Okay.
It's the source of those universal themes and symbols we find in myths, religions, and art,
Okay.
across cultures and throughout history.
So even though our personal experiences shape who we are, there's also this deeper level where we're all connected through these shared patterns and ways of being.
That's it. You got it. And this brings us back to the case of SW. Her visions weren't just limited to her own personal experiences. She described these elaborate mystical systems, powers of light and darkness, and even meetings with star dwellers, which all seem to tap into those universal archetypes Jung believed are in the collective unconscious.
So her mind was pulling from both her personal history and this deeper well of shared human experience.
Exactly. It's like a blend. And this raises another question. Does Jung's psychological approach completely debunk all things supernatural?
That's what I was wondering, yeah. If it's all in our heads, does that mean there's nothing more to it? Are ghosts just our imaginations running wild?
Well, it's not that simple. You see, Jung himself witnessed things he couldn't explain. He even studied spiritualist literature looking for psychological insights. He wasn't totally ruling out the possibility of something beyond our current understanding.
So it's like he was saying, hey, maybe we just don't have the tools to understand it yet.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Jung argued that our current scientific methods might not be able to fully grasp those more subtle events that seem to defy our usual understanding of cause and effect.
So there's room for both scientific inquiry and acknowledging that there might be things we can't fully explain yet.
Exactly. And maybe the best example of this is Jung's own personal experience with you. Well, let's call it a haunted cottage.
Oh, wait a minute. Jung himself had a ghostly encounter. Now you have to tell me all about it.
Okay. So picture this. Jung rents this quaint little cottage in the English countryside. Sounds idyllic, right?
Sure. So far, so good. What happened?
Well, on his very first night there, he gets hit with this wave of strange lethargy. Like he feels paralyzed almost. And this awful smell fills the air, this sickly sweet odor.
Okay, that's creepy. What did he do?
He lights a candle thinking maybe he just forgot to open the windows or something. But no, they're wide open, fresh air is blowing in, and there's no trace of that smell.
So it wasn't anything physical in the room.
That's what it seemed like. But the next night, the smell comes back, stronger this time, and he realizes it's the unmistakable stench of open carcinoma.
Oh, wow. Disturbing. And Jung would recognize that smell, right?
Oh, absolutely. He had worked in a psychiatric clinic, so he knew that smell all too well.
Yeah, that's rough. But it gets even worse, right?
Yeah.
You said it was a whole haunted house experience.
Oh, it does. Next comes this constant dripping sound, like a leaky faucet, but there's no water anywhere. And then there are rustling sounds, creaking furniture, knocking on the walls from outside.
Oh, man. I'm getting chills just listening to this. Did he ever figure out what was causing all of this?
He tried. He really did. He considered a few explanations, like maybe it was hypnagogic hallucinations, those vivid, dreamlike experiences that can happen when you're falling asleep. He also thought about the possibility of what he called psychic smells that might trigger intuition.
Okay, psychic smells.
Yeah.
You're saying our sense of smell could be linked to our intuition.
It's an intriguing thought, isn't it? Could that gut feeling we sometimes get be a remnant of our animal ancestors' reliance on smell? Back when smell was so crucial for survival, Jung seemed to think it was possible.
Wow, that's a mind-blowing idea. Like those unsettling feelings we get might be trying to tell us something. Maybe whispers from our deeper selves, or even, something beyond ourselves.
Right. Then there's one more layer to the story that makes it even more interesting.
There's more. Come on, you can't leave me hanging like that.
Remember how Jung had sort of jokingly mentioned the house being haunted to explain why the rent was so low?
Yeah, I remember that his friend just laughed it off, right?
Yeah, he didn't believe it at all. But guess what? It turns out the house actually did have a reputation for being haunted. People who worked there refused to stay alone after sunset. They were terrified. And even Jung's skeptical friend ended up having his own creepy experience.
Oh no, what happened?
So he decides to stay the night alone, just to prove Jung wrong. He even brought a shotgun for protection.
Oh, wow. He was really committed to debunking this whole thing.
He was. But as soon as it got dark, he started hearing footsteps in the corridor outside his room.
Oh, man. That's scary. What did he do?
He tried to barricade himself in, but the footsteps just kept getting closer.
Oh, no.
In the end, he actually slept in the garden to escape those unsettling sounds.
He was that freaked out. So even the skeptic had a creepy experience. What happened to the house in the end?
Well, here's the kicker. The owner had the cottage torn down.
What? Seriously?
Nobody would rent it anymore because of its reputation.
Wow. That whole story is crazy. It really makes you think about what was going on in that house, doesn't it?
It does. And it shows how powerful and mysterious the human psyche can be. The line between what we consider real and unreal can get pretty blurry.
We've covered a lot today. Jung's perspective on the occult, the case of SW, the unconscious mind, and even a real-life ghost story. What's next?
I think it's time we take a closer look at this concept of the unconscious, both the personal and the collective, and really explore how it might explain those experiences we call occult.
Okay, sounds good. Listeners, stay tuned, because in part 2, we are going even deeper into the hidden depths of the mind. Okay, so we're back and ready to dive even deeper into these murky waters of the unconscious mind. We were just talking about how Jung believed in not one, but two layers of the unconscious, the personal and the collective.
Right, 2 layers. It's a pretty complex idea.
It is, but it seems to explain so much about human behavior and even those experiences we might call supernatural. Like, think about it this way. Your personal conscious is kind of like your own private library, right?
A library. Okay, I like that analogy.
It's filled with all your memories, your dreams, and all those shadowy bits and pieces you might have tried to forget about over the years.
Right, all that stuff we try to bury deep down.
Exactly. Like that super embarrassing moment from middle school that still makes you cringe.
Oh, yeah, totally. We all have those.
But then there's the collective unconscious. And Jung says this one is more like a vast public library.
Okay, a public library. I'm following.
One that we all share, all of humanity.
Yeah.
It's filled with those universal archetypes and symbols that have been with us since, like, the beginning of time.
Wow, that's a powerful image.
It is, right?
Okay, so you've mentioned archetypes a few times now. What are they exactly, and how do they work? For people who might not be familiar with Jung's ideas.
Yeah, good point. So think of archetypes as these universal patterns of thought and behavior that are, like, hardwired into our psyches.
Hardwired?
They're not specific memories. They're more like predispositions, like tendencies to experience and understand the world in certain ways.
Okay, so it's like these archetypes are the underlying blueprints for our emotions, our relationships, even our spiritual beliefs.
Exactly. And because these archetypes are universal, they show up everywhere across cultures and throughout history. You see them reflected in myths, religious symbols, art, even in those dreams that you have over and over again.
Oh, yeah, the recurring dreams. Those are fascinating.
They are, and it kind of explains why certain stories and symbols resonate so deeply with us, even if we can't quite put our finger on why.
Right, like there's something familiar about them even if we've never encountered them before.
Exactly. And this is where things get really interesting. Jung noticed that these archetypes often pop up in people's occult experiences too.
Oh, interesting. So, like what? Give me an example.
Well, someone might describe encountering a wise old man or a woman,
Right.
Which could be a manifestation of what Jung called the wise old sage archetype.
I see. And what about those stories of people seeing shadowy figures or feeling a sense of dread? Could that be connected to the shadow archetype we talked about earlier?
Exactly. The one that represents all those darker aspects of ourselves.
Right, the stuff we try to hide.
And remember, Jung wasn't trying to prove or disprove whether these entities are actually real, in some objective sense.
Right, it wasn't about proving or disproving anything.
He was more interested in what their appearance tells us about the person who's experiencing them, what's going on in their psyche.
So instead of asking, are ghosts real?
Right.
We should be asking, what does this ghostly experience reveal about the person who's having it?
Exactly. The whole different way of looking at things.
It is. It reframes these potentially scary encounters as opportunities for self-discovery.
Right. It's like those shadows might actually be holding important clues about who we are.
I love that. And that leads us to another important aspect of Jung's work that you mentioned earlier, the idea of synchronicity.
Oh, yeah, synchronicity. Okay, I'll admit, this one's still a bit fuzzy for me. What exactly did Jung mean by that?
Well, synchronicity is all about those meaningful coincidences that seem to defy the normal laws of cause and effect. Like, have you ever experienced that?
Oh, all the time. Like when you're thinking about an old friend and then they suddenly call you out of the blue.
There you go. Perfect example. Or maybe you're struggling with some problem and then you just happen to come across a book or a quote that gives you exactly the insight you need at that moment.
Oh, yeah, that's happened to me too. It can feel pretty uncanny, like, is this really just a coincidence?
Right. And Jung believed that these synchronicities often occur when our unconscious is trying to get our attention.
Like it's sending us a signal.
Exactly. It's like our inner world is lining up with the outer world in these meaningful ways.
So it's not just random chance.
That's what Jung thought. He saw a deeper pattern at work, a connection between our psychological state and the things that are happening around us. He even suggested that these synchronicities could offer us guidance, like a message from the universe.
It's a wild concept, I have to admit.
Yeah.
But it makes you wonder about those times when you just have this feeling that something big is about to happen, and then it does.
Exactly. Like the universe is conspiring with your unconscious to deliver a message.
A lot of people who report having those so-called occult experiences also talk about experiencing a high degree of synchronicity in their lives.
Oh, really? Like what kind of things?
Well, they might have a premonition about something, and then it actually comes true.
Whoa, that's intense.
Right. Or they might encounter certain symbols repeatedly that seem to hold some kind of personal significance for them, like they keep seeing the same number everywhere they go or something.
Huh. That's interesting. So it's like all these pieces fit together, you know? The unconscious, the archetypes, the synchronicity. It's like we're all connected to something bigger than ourselves, and sometimes those connections become more obvious through these unusual experiences.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And it definitely makes you think, right? Like, what if there's more to reality than we realize? What if we're all part of this interconnected web of meaning?
It's a fascinating possibility. But let's bring it back to Jung for a moment. I'm curious about his take on the whole idea of spirits and the afterlife. Did he believe in them?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Hmm.
He was exploring all these mysterious realms, but did he actually believe in the supernatural?
Well, Jung is always very careful not to make any definite statements about whether spirits are actually real, you know? Objectively real. He often emphasized that his focus as a psychologist was on the subjective experience, on understanding the internal reality of these phenomena.
So he wasn't saying spirits don't exist.
Right.
But he wasn't saying they do exist either.
Exactly. He was open to the possibility, but he also recognized that we don't have all the answers yet.
So he was approaching it with that same open-minded curiosity we talked about earlier.
Exactly, acknowledging that there might be more to the universe than we currently understand.
Right. But he also understood the impact of those beliefs, right? Like the psychological power of believing in spirits and the afterlife.
Oh, absolutely. He knew that those beliefs have been a huge part of human culture for centuries.
They offer people comfort, a sense of meaning and purpose, especially when we're facing death or the unknown. They help us deal with those big existential questions we've been grappling with forever.
And Jung saw these beliefs as expressions of something deep within us, you know? Like an archetypal longing for wholeness, for connection, for something that transcends the material world.
So it's not just about whether spirits are real,
Right.
but about what those beliefs tell us about our human need for something more.
Exactly. And that's where Jung's perspective can be so valuable. By understanding those deeper psychological needs, we can have a better understanding of these beliefs and appreciate their importance in the human experience.
It's been so fascinating to explore all of this, I'm starting to see these so-called occult experiences in a completely different light.
Yeah.
Not as something to be afraid of or dismissed, but as these potential windows into our minds and maybe even into something larger.
It's a whole new perspective. And believe it or not, there's still so much more to discover.
Oh, I bet. Jung's work is full of amazing insights.
It is. And it can help us make sense of those experiences where psychology and the unexplained kind of collide.
Well, I'm definitely ready for more. Listeners, be sure to join us for the last part of our deep dive, where we'll explore some of Jung's own personal encounters with the unexplained. And we'll talk about how his ideas continue to shape our understanding of the mind and all those mysteries that still baffle us today. All right, welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into Carl Jung and the occult. We've been talking about how he used psychology, especially ideas about the unconscious mind, to make sense of these strange experiences. But here's what's even more interesting. Jung didn't just study these things. He actually had his own encounters with the unexplained.
It's true. He wasn't just talking the talk, he was walking the walk.
Right. So what kinds of things did he experience?
Well, one of his most famous encounters involved something he called the ringing bell phenomenon.
A ringing bell, like a real physical bell.
It's not quite that simple. It started with a series of really strange things happening in his house. Things would move around for no reason, doors would slam shut on their own, and he kept hearing these weird noises.
Almost like the haunted cottage we talked about earlier.
Yeah, there are some similarities for sure. But in Jung's case, the most persistent and disturbing thing was the sound of a bell ringing, seemingly out of nowhere.
A phantom bell. That's so creepy. Did he ever figure out what was causing it?
He tried. He investigated every possible explanation he could think of, faulty wiring, loose pipes, anything that could make that sound. But he couldn't find anything.
So it wasn't anything physical.
That's what it seemed like. And that's when he started to think maybe something else was going on.
What do you mean?
Well, he started to suspect that these events weren't just random. He wondered if they were actually expressions of unconscious psychic energy. You know, like that energy we've been talking about.
Right, the energy of the unconscious.
Exactly. Jung believed that this energy, when it's not properly integrated, could actually manifest in the physical world in strange ways.
So it's like the unconscious is leaking out and affecting things around us.
That's a good way to put it. And he thought that these so-called supernatural events were often the unconscious's way of trying to communicate with us.
Like it's trying to break through into our conscious awareness.
Exactly. Like it's sending us a message in a language we don't quite understand.
And in Jung's case, he believed the ringing bell was symbolic, right?
Yes. He saw it as a representation of a deep psychological conflict he was dealing with at the time.
So it wasn't a ghost or a spirit, but a message from his own unconscious mind.
That was his interpretation. He saw it as a wake-up call, a challenge to confront those parts of himself he'd been ignoring or suppressing.
It's almost like those psychological horror movies, where all the scary stuff is happening in the main character's mind.
Yeah, I see what you mean. But in this case, it's not about mental illness or anything. It's about the unconscious trying to guide us towards wholeness and integration.
I love that idea. So it's not just about understanding these occult experiences intellectually, but about using them for personal growth.
Exactly. They can be opportunities for self-discovery and transformation.
Well, we've explored so much in this deep dive. Jung's unique approach to the occult, the idea of the unconscious, personal and collective, and even his own personal experiences. But why does this all matter? What's the takeaway for our listeners?
I think Jung's work gives us a really valuable way of understanding not just those strange phenomena we call occult, but also ourselves, the hidden depths of our own minds.
Right, because even if we don't believe in ghosts or spirits, we all have this unconscious part of ourselves that's influencing us in ways we might not realize.
Absolutely. And Jung's ideas can help us make sense of those parts of ourselves that don't always seem rational, or those weird coincidences that make you wonder if there's something more going on.
Like maybe we're more connected to the universe than we think.
Exactly. And by understanding those unconscious patterns at play in our lives, we can start to make more conscious choices.
Well, this has been an incredible journey. We've gone from real-life case studies to complex psychological theories, and even touched on a real-life ghost story. I feel like my understanding of the human mind has expanded in ways I never imagined.
It's been my pleasure to explore all of this with you.
And listeners, the next time you experience something you can't explain, maybe a strange dream, a coincidence, or even just a weird feeling, ask her, what's my unconscious trying to tell me? What's the deeper meaning behind this?
It's a great question to keep in mind.
And, as always, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep into the mysteries of the mind and the universe. Until next time, happy exploring.